who is joining us. So I'm going to ask everyone if you can please mute yourself so that we can minimize the background noise for our listening, but also for the recording. So I just also want to let everyone know that we are recording this session and it will be available on YouTube along with the first three. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming. It's a really blustery day. If we lose power, I have some backups who will continue with the questions. I'm down here in Long Beach and it's a little bit windy. And I hope everybody stays safe and well. This is the third in a series of 3 forums that Hofstra Labor Studies, the Hofstra Center for the Study of Labor and Democracy, Long Island Jobs with Justice, and A.L.L.O.W, Advancing Local Leadership Opportunities for Women, has collaborated on. For the summer, our topic was, or is, reopening Long Island and building a fair economy. And this final panel is on the very important question of the very important issue of immigrant workers. And I welcome you all. And I thank Greg DeFreitas, Ani Halaz, Diane Cantave, Rich Kubek, and Alexandra Howell for being really great partners in this. And also Athleen Collins, Christine Glancer, Carol Mallison, who has done all the setup work for today, and Jacqueline Hulse. Again, thank you. You are the ones who make everything happen here at Hofstra, and we're most grateful to you. I would like to introduce our panelists because we could not have this event without the really wonderful people who are doing terrific work, who have agreed to be here with us. And they are Nathalia Varela. She is Associate Counsel for Latino Justice, PRLDEF, P-R-L-D-E-F. Thank you very much for being here. Elizabeth Jordan, Supervising Attorney for Workplace Justice, Make the Road, New York. Thank you, Elizabeth. Monica Diaz, Field Rep for 32BJ, SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. Thank you, Monica. It's good to see you again. Good to see everyone and meet new people. This has been a really terrific experience. I am sorry to say that Angel Reyes, due to the conditions of the storm, specifically the lack of electricity, had to jump off. He is the Long Island Coordinator for Rural and Migrant Ministry. So I hope that he can jump back on, but if not, I do appreciate his willingness to be here in spirit, though he could not be here in fact. So what we're going to do, I have a series of questions for our panelists, and I will ask them, and they will then respond, and I'll just pitch them to in no particular order. Panelists, if there's a question you'd rather pass on, you're welcome to do that. If there's anything you'd like to add beyond the question, please feel free to do that. And then at the end of the questions, our final question will be about opportunities that you have, people in the audience, for advocacy on the issue and the various issues that we will cover.
I don't know what
today.
to do here. It's going to beep constantly.
And then we also will take questions from you. So you can put your questions in the chat and I will do my best to get to them. Alexandra, Greg, Rich, and Diane, please flag any questions that I am not seeing or any people who want to participate that I am not seeing. And we'll make sure everybody has a voice in this. So without further ado, I will begin. And this is sort of an overview question to kind of just get the lay of the land with regard to the issues that we're talking about today. And so I guess we'll start with Nathalia, if you would. If you could just tell us what challenges do immigrants face during this during the COVID pandemic?
A small question. I know we got the questions in advance, but it's still a whammy. Thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you to everybody who reached out and putting on this panel. It's so important and timely. So I guess what challenges do they face? Well, all the limited protections that are out there right now, for the most part, the federal protections that have been issued, none of them apply to immigrants. None of them apply to undocumented immigrants. Most of them don't apply to a large swath of immigrants who are documented as well. And the other, and so there's no financial, safety net for many immigrants. The other issue is, still ongoing racism and nativism. And so it is a very trying time, and when everyone has such limited resources, we do see an uptick in hate crimes, racial bias, and people feeling empowered to behave the way that they want, which I think most people can see happening in the media and different media reports that have come out as well. In addition to that, immigrant workers are disproportionately in the essential worker field, and also in low-wage essential worker fields. So that doesn't mean that there's something distinct for immigrants that happen in the workplace because they are an essential worker, but it's ongoing discrimination that has gone on since. So prior to COVID-19, there was relentless discrimination that was experienced by the immigrant worker, especially an undocumented worker, and forms of retaliation for exercising rights that they do have pursuant to different labor laws. So, for example, in New York State, you can make claims for wage theft, and undocumented persons have different venues, usually through state, or facets usually through state law. However, it's that much more difficult when there are issues of retaliation and now unbelievable amount of poverty. Lastly, I would touch upon the idea that with that poverty, that obviously bleeds out to every aspect of life, including housing and the ability to obtain relief for housing. So even for other low income persons that are not immigrants, it's challenging. But for example, in different places, and this is that Nassau County and Suffolk County don't generally have these options, but in the city, even if you wanted to apply for emergency relief, it requires a certain status in order to obtain that. So those are all increased issues, and generally, the immigrant population has been hit harder by the actual virus itself, by COVID-19, and so there's fear of going to healthcare and increased likelihood of more crowded living situations, which increases spread.
Okay. Elizabeth, is there anything you'd like to add or elaborate?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I think Nathalia really hit on what we have been seeing at Make the Road New York among our membership, which is largely made up of working Latino immigrants across New York State. We've all seen unprecedented job loss as a result of this pandemic. So we have seen just, the devastating effect that has on families who are earning low wages and are, even before the pandemic, had been really subject to kind of epidemic levels of wage theft without real enforcement. And so now that they have lost their jobs in construction and restaurants and domestic work, we've really seen among our membership that people's primary concern has been their inability to pay rent or put food on the table. We've had an outpouring of people who have been unable to find work, lost their jobs, and have really been struggling to feed their families. And then the other large group we have seen are essential workers, like Nathalia pointed out. These are people working in delivery or cleaning or warehouses who have had to continue working for economic reasons throughout the pandemic. But, these our membership are primarily in non-union jobs, and they have been asked to go to work without the necessary protections to keep them safe. We did a survey at Make the Road of our membership, and we found that 88% had lost their jobs due to the pandemic. And as Nathalia pointed out, only 5% had received any unemployment insurance. And that is because they have been deliberately left out of the relief efforts that Congress has passed. Even New York State has really failed to provide for our immigrant families, and that, you know, is a campaign that Make the Road and hundreds of other organizations across the state are really pushing now, to provide similar kind of relief, economic relief to immigrant families who are ineligible for unemployment insurance or other relief under the CARES Act.
Wow, thank you. And Monica.
Hello, hi everyone. So our membership is very diverse, but our members became essential workers overnight. They've always been essential to us and to the buildings that they clean. 32BJ represents cleaning workers, maintenance workers, security guards, janitors. And here on Long Island, the population of our membership, it's majorly impacted by our members having to choose whether to go to work or go to work to get a paycheck, and not lose their seniority or their health. And a lot of our members who passed away were, members who were at health risks, whether it was diabetes, high blood pressure, whatever it was, other than an underlying condition, but they had to choose going to work or paying the bills. Here on Long Island, a lot of our members make a little bit more than minimum wage, but not enough to be able to say I have a union job and I only have one job. So they didn't have the choice to stay home and collect unemployment because most of the time they have another job. They have another job to be able to, sustain their households with 2, sometimes 3 paychecks. And so the unemployment benefit wasn't an option for them. So they had to basically risk their lives. And the loss of a family member is not only the loss of a family member, which is the main, loss that a family has, but also income benefits such as health insurance. So now these are the things that members have to deal with, and their families, are left without. During the pandemic, essential workers had to have PPE, personal protection equipment, but it was also a fight with companies to make sure that they had. We all heard the news, hospitals and healthcare workers had to come first and have the PPE provided, and that was all on the news. But then our struggle, our members' fight was that sometimes they were getting 1 mask a week. Sometimes they didn't have gloves, and these are big companies that, again, their responsibility was to provide, but during that time, members had the option to work or go home. And then that meant have a paycheck or go without. And with our immigrant population, they don't always have the choice to file for any other benefits because like Elizabeth and Nathalia has said, sometimes it's more than proof of income that they need to have. So those were a few of the things that we had to deal with and our members had to deal with during this time. Some of the malls have been opening. Our members are mall cleaners, but they have not all been called back. The schedules are shortened. The malls have opened with limited hours and some stores are not coming back. Same thing with office buildings. We have the luxury to stay home, and that means less garbage to pick up in the offices and less people that are working. So yeah, those are the struggles that our immigrant members, population, and I say membership in general have to deal with right now.
Wow. Okay. So a follow-up question. Some of you,
Marianne,
yeah,
do you mind if I actually forgot one thing that I really wanted to highlight, since you had sent out the questions in advance. And so I did really want to highlight also that this is all in the backdrop of like the administration and the Department of Homeland Security endlessly cutting into, you know, protections for immigrants and for the possibility of adjustment of status throughout the entire administration, but as it continues to happen during this time. So during this, like all of these stressors, these economic stressors that are happening, on top of that, these immigrant workers and this immigrant population are being, you know, somewhat hunted during this time too, knowing that they don't have any of those different sorts of protections that may have been there first, or the ever-changing landscape of the immigration law as it's done through an executive agency. So I just wanted to make sure that that was highlighted if we're speaking specifically about immigrant workers, that all of this is with this looming backdrop of knowing that at any moment their life could be, you know, changed and disrupted in a geographical response or in a very, you know, physical and in no other way that I can think of violent way.
important point. Thanks, Nathalia. So I'm going to pitch then the next question to you again, just to continue. And the three of you have alluded to some of these, but let's kind of draw them out more explicitly. How do the challenges posed by COVID reflect or intensify some of the deeper structural injustices faced by immigrant workers on Long Island? If you want to, Nathalia, if you'd like to.
Sure. You know, like I just mentioned as well, like the fact that immigrant workers are in any way treated distinctly during a time, it's a total failure to recognize the need for prioritizing public health. You know, people, you know, it's not to politicize it, it's just generally how I think about it, which is no matter what, immigrant workers, status, no status, whichever way you want to look at, are just, you know, living, breathing human beings that are seeking to work. And so I think that, you know, all of the system's failures beforehand get impacted by this culture of fear that's really happened too. So considering the increased exposure pathways that we've just laid out between Elizabeth, Monica, and myself, you know, this increased fear of being other and having to access any sort of benefits, even health benefits that were afforded. So for example, the emergency care that was afforded to everyone was very difficult to get out to the community and for the community to feel comfortable in accessing, despite the fact that, you know, public health should have been prioritized at this point. And I think with that said, that goes to the failure to provide economic relief. So when we talk about the structural, you know, how does this intensify and deepen structural injustices is, you know, in a capitalist society, money is power, and the fact that there is no money or no economic relief or recognition of essential workers in general, not just immigrant workers, but the recognition of all essential workers as well, you know, allows for continuing like a hierarchy that's, you know, racialized and as well have an economic tiers. So I think that how does this deeper structural injustices, more fear, and then on top of that, we can't ignore that people have been emboldened to speak out against fear of, you know, non-immigrant persons and people of color in general. So it's no surprise that many immigrant workers, sorry, that's my puppy in the background, dreaming of apparently playing and barking. Yeah, with that, I think she's gonna go for a little while, so I'll pass it over to Elizabeth or Monica.
Monica, would you like to continue the?
Well, you know, like I said before, it's a lot of our members feel like they don't have an option. They have to work. And in many cases, that is the case. Either they work or they don't get any benefits. They don't have any income. So in the phase of reopening, age and underlying conditions basically don't matter because, they need to survive. So, it's a challenge to be able to, thankfully for a contract that we're able to provide some type of, I would say some type of assistance and making sure that they're able to keep their job if they can't make it to work. Whether it's, it comes down to things that's, as down as to their right to work. Many people weren't able to go to work because the person that gave them a ride happened to, be positive, and, everyone in the car became sick and things like that. So those are things that, the company wasn't really thinking about. They just thought they had to go to work. They had to clean the building. The buildings remained open, the ones that did. And so there was no choice. And that's not only to say, again, it's not only to say immigrant workers, but, everyone that works cleaning in a building had the responsibility to be at work, even, when they were at risk.
I'm listening, something you said really sort of, everything has been striking, but I think the issue of public transportation here on Long Island, when people think of public transportation to get to work, they think of getting into Queens or Manhattan, right, or Brooklyn. But if you've got to go anywhere else, you're basically screwed unless you have access to a car.
Right. And then, a lot of the people that clean at night get off at 10:30 at night. So even if there is bus transportation, we know that it's very limited here on Long Island. So then it's, getting a ride with a coworker. And again, it happened in one of my buildings where, the person that gave them a ride or someone in the car was infected. And then, 5 people weren't able to come to work because of that. So it's, it's an issue that also goes with other things that, we need to work on here on Long Island.
Yeah, one of many. Elizabeth?
Sure. I think Monica and Nathalia touched on a lot, but as Nathalia pointed out, the virus itself has disproportionately impacted communities of color. Job loss has disproportionately impacted communities of color. And it has been even worse for job loss among foreign-born workers. And so I think at every stage, whether it's, contracting the virus, being, in work situations that are extremely precarious without the proper protection, or being at home without any of the relief or options that other workers might be privy to, these communities have been just hit over and over and over again. I think one structural failure that this has also really highlighted is our healthcare system. So many immigrant workers who are on the front lines and are exposed have been unable to access proper health care because they are not in jobs with health insurance, and they don't maybe qualify for other forms of health insurance. So we've really seen anti-immigrant health policies and structures through this pandemic that really has just been a devastating impact, I think, on these communities. Not to mention that, that discourages people from seeking out treatment when they need it, which has an effect on the community at large. So I think we've also just really seen how by failing to kind of protect and provide the necessary kind of services and protections for everyone, how quickly it affects all of us.
Yeah.
I think with that too, just now that Julie woke up. I think with that too, there's one other thing, which is, you know, so there's, you know, my blanket statement beforehand, and I think that Monica and Elizabeth have alluded to, or frankly said directly, is that, you know, it does distinctly impact immigrant workers. However, a deeper structural injustice that is touching upon everybody, that, you know, that has a disproportionate impact on immigrant workers is also a failure to have a living wage for essential workers who are being disproportionately affected by this, and who immigrants are disproportionately represented in that box. But the failure to have these structures that have allowed people to actually be able to maybe have a savings, or to be able to only go to one job, as Monica alluded to before, that, you know, these workers are working multiple jobs. So, you know, being able to just have one job, being able to actually support your family on that one job, and not working 100 hours a week to get there. All of those things were really evident during this time, that the culture that we have as workers before COVID-19 is exasperated in this situation as well, because now we see who's essential, despite the fact that those paychecks don't reflect it, nor do the benefits. And we're seeing who's essential, and now you need a reason to give more to these workers. But the truth is, you're essential all the time. Now, you know, in a time right now where people are reprioritizing their lives in every way, as I am, as I think anybody on this call has reprioritized what really matters. We see that grocery stores really matter, and that every day people are showing up to do that work. We're seeing that all these essential workers are really at the crux of what allows us to engage with our loved ones and be integral to our society. So I think that these do reflect deeper structural injustices always for immigrant workers. And obviously I work for Latino justice. I think it obviously disproportionately affects Latinos. That's another structural injustice that's happening there, as everyone's alluded to on this call, which is that it does affect people of color distinctly. But these are also different structural injustices where we have created such a giant gap between essential workers and the corporations and or the employers who are employing them, having such disparate income. And what that does during this pandemic as well is relevant.
Yeah, I know in my community, the grocery store here, Stop and Shop, has been, they're taking away, right, hazard pay. And so we've had Local 338 represented on our panels and on the organizing committee, actually. And that's one of their issues too, is that these workers deserve hazard pay. As somebody said to me not too long ago, is if we still need the arrows going up and down the aisles in the grocery store, they still need the hazard pay. And so on the note also of what you just said, Nathalia, about income and wages, I put a note in the chat that we should call our US senators and ask them to extend the enhanced unemployment benefits. And the number is in there. There's been a lot of talk about how maybe it's too much money. But in fact, I think it helps to highlight what you just raised, which is, you know, that we don't pay people enough. And we really need to address the issue. There's a question in the chat, what grocery stores are still providing hazard pay? I'm not sure. That's probably a question for RWDSU, UFCW, who I don't think we have anyone on the call right now who could answer that. But if we do, if somebody does have that information, and exactly, we could encourage people to frequent those chains. But you should ask when you go to the grocery store, and just make a point of saying, you know, expressing your opinion that in fact, if they're not still providing hazard pay, that they should be. And we should continue the enhanced unemployment benefits, obviously. So let me shift the conversation towards something that's been implicit in the comments that people have made. And maybe we should we should draw that out a little more. And that's the distinction between documented and undocumented workers, how some of the issues that you have raised here might be experienced differently for documented and undocumented workers. And I'm wondering, Elizabeth, if you would like to start addressing that. I know some of our panelists have had to jump on and off because they're losing their connection. Is Elizabeth still on?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Okay.
Thanks, Marianne. Sure. So I think for undocumented workers who have stayed on the job, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, even before the pandemic, we see that undocumented workers are in a particularly kind of precarious power imbalance often with their employers. You know, we know many employers who threaten immigration status related retaliation when a worker stands up for even the most basic protections that they are entitled to by law. For example, if a worker complains about receiving less than the minimum wage or not being paid overtime, which we see, you know, commonly. The restaurant industry in New York underpays workers as, you know, a matter of business. We see it in construction, in non-union, and this I'm talking in non-union construction, in cleaning, in you know, domestic work, in so many low-wage industries. So, you know, these workers are subject to kind of gross violations of basic minimum labor rights and protections. And this virus is going to make that worse. People have been out of work and are, you know, needing to get income, and they will be subject to an even kind of more imbalanced power dynamic now with employers who are reopening. I think people will be even more hesitant to come forward. And, you know, we've seen also a total collapse of the agencies that are enforced, that are charged with enforcing these protections. You know, I think we've all read about the Department of Labor being just overwhelmed by the unemployment insurance applications. You know, we have seen in our work that has translated into a total slowing down of their enforcement of wage and hour laws. On even the governor's protections through the New York Pause Order, now New York Forward, it does not seem to be easy to enforce those laws. So workers who are being forced to come back in unsafe conditions, or workers who were, you know, supposed to be staying at home, but their employers were forcing them to come in, or threatening that they would lose their jobs later. It is very difficult to enforce those protections. We have filed a few complaints with the Department of Labor. It seems like they are trying to investigate them, but we have not seen penalties yet for employers who are not following the rules. So that is one piece, and I will let my colleagues speak to some of the others.
Monica?
Well, yeah, I mean, Elizabeth touched on a lot. You know, there's those employers who, you know, make the threats, even though there is a contract. There's employers that, you know, make the threats. I mean, I would say there's also, you know, that situation where there's only half of what the regular staff number is that's required, and whoever, you know, thinks twice about saying, yes, I'm coming in, it's basically skipped, and you know, not guarantee that they will be called back, and, you know, anytime soon. And that's what seniority, you know, and again, these are people that may not qualify for unemployment, not only because of, you know, status, but they can't stop, they don't have one income, but then they can't stop working the other to be able to qualify. So yeah, there's, schedule changes that, again, if they work in one job, they have to make the decision as of what job they choose. And sometimes it's not an option, what income to choose. So, yeah, those, again, and that's membership in general, not necessarily just immigrant workers, but, then there's those people that always, have an income, but still can't afford housing. And, they are probably in a shelter waiting for their number to be called. And now added on to, the amount of people that, as much as the governor has said that no one's being evicted, we know it's happening. Especially, here on Long Island, when a lot of people live in private homes where, the 2-3 apartment situation, that if the rent is not being paid, they are being evicted. So, there's issues on issues piling on. And yeah, it's just, if anyone has a question, there's, scenarios after scenarios of things that are really happening.
It's like a perfect storm of issues here.
Yeah.
Nathalia?
It's the same, but with this extra looming dark cloud of fear that happens. So I would say before COVID-19, the response is all going to be the same, which is, a big part of my docket at Latino Justice is representing people in discrimination cases at work, in National Labor Relations Board cases, and many of my clients are immigrants, and I think that, and also many of the people that I just encounter are immigrants, documented or undocumented. And the truth is that there's a certain level of human rights abuses that are allowed within the workplace when not every single employer, but many employers know that a person is undocumented. They're taking them on that way. They know that there's less places for recourse. They know that these workers are scared of law enforcement to report them. They know that the workers are vulnerable. So, for example, in different industries, it's undocumented workers don't have a car. If they don't have a car, they rely on their employer to pick them up, drop them off, and so they're dropping them off at their homes, and then afterwards they're being threatened with retaliation that they'll call ICE on them. And what that leaves them in is, do I pick up and move and then try to find somewhere that's going to accept me without all the documentation that's required for the lease, and re-enroll my child at school? All the list of terribles that followed that. And now also, if you're an undocumented worker and an essential worker, you're making this giant decision of potentially living in an overcrowded home. And do I go to work and allow for any abuses because I'm, also there's the psychology of I'm lucky to have a job during this time, no matter what the conditions are, and I need to be able to feed my family, because there's no safety net. There's no safety net for undocumented workers, and there's certainly no safety net for a number of documented immigrants. So for documented immigrants as well, it's a challenge. People who are documented are just as scared. And if you change someone, like if someone is not a U.S. citizen, and because of the way the federal administration has reconstructed even legal permanent resident status, TPS, the temporary protected status and such, there's still fear of retaliation. You still don't want to speak up too much, and the pandemic has just exacerbated all of those things. So the lack of access to any sorts of funds, and as everyone has said on this call, making that decision between the health of your family and being able to feed your family or having any source of income will really push the limits on human rights abuses in the workplace.
I wanted to take a moment to answer a question. has 32BJ have any success demanding hazard pay so far? The bigger companies and commercial buildings are basically just waiting to hear, you know, from the federal government. But we've had taken on to asking in residential buildings. There's a lot of buildings that have board, executive boards, or you know, boards that are formed by tenants. And then there's management agencies also that manage these buildings. So we have taken the question on to the boards and management, realty, you know, realty management agents to ask for hazard pay. And we haven't given a number because, you know, we know certain buildings are able to give more than others. And that's a decision that we've left up to the board. And in many cases, we have been successful where our members have been receiving a bonus or hazard pay by their employers. And so it's a fight that, you know, along with Jobs with Justice and Make the Road and Salon, we're also pushing for essential pay for all. Because again, you know, not everyone is eligible for unemployment or for the essential, you know, for the essential pay through unemployment. So, and the other half of the question is, are you seeing more workers interested in unionizing? 32BJ is an organizing union, you know, actively always organizing. I was organizing a factory where one of our employers who has a sign-on contract with us was cleaning with 40 workers. I was short by one card when the pandemic started to be able to be recognized. As the pandemic went on in the middle of March, I was able to get that card signed. We have been recognized, and you know, now we're negotiating a contract for these workers to be able to, you know, have better benefits. And this is in the East End, so it's pretty exciting because, you know, organizing during this time sounds like it's almost impossible, you know, doing Zoom calls and not door knocking anymore. It's been a challenge, but it's happening. So yes, I think members and workers overall, you know, feel like they need that extra backup.
We celebrate your victories. We will
Thank you,
take our
thank you.
victories where we can get them right
Yes.
now. Right? Terrific. That's well, good. That's good news. So we have a question now that focuses on legal challenges. And Monica, of course, you're welcome to join in, but this is a question that's a little bit more focused. So if you could please, Elizabeth, we'll start with you. If you could discuss the particular legal challenges faced by immigrants, both documented and undocumented in the region, and how the pandemic has affected those challenges.
Sure. I mean, I won't repeat myself, but I just want to highlight, I think on one level, you know, I think we've all been sharing for a lot of immigrants, especially those in lower wage jobs and industries, there are always huge challenges. There are language barriers, there is retaliation threats, there is, you know, a real power imbalance in normal times, and that has been exacerbated now. But I think also what we are going to see, especially as, you know, things are reopening, is, you know, the federal CDC standards for reopening businesses are lame. They are not strong. They are not really designed, I don't think, in a way that is going to keep workers safe. There's very few that are actually enforceable. I think, you know, there has been a lot of coverage lately about, you know, most of their guidelines are recommendations of what employers should do to keep their workers safe, but we should be under no illusion that employers will voluntarily comply with measures that may, have additional costs if they're not required to. In our work, we see the worst of people. We see the worst of employers who will take any chance to cut their costs, even if it means putting people's lives at risk, and certainly if it's putting someone's well-being at risk. New York State has promulgated some stronger standards, although they are also pretty minimal in terms of which ones are absolutely mandatory. And they're very hard to enforce. Go to the New York State Department of Labor, which is totally overwhelmed, and it's not easy to enforce these. We're trying some novel theories in court to try to enforce these, but that is also an uphill battle, and we're trying new things. I think we're seeing employers are organized. They are now pushing, employees who are returning to sign liability waivers. So I think we need to all be really thinking as a community and thinking, about what we can all do to demand that employers keep all of our workers safe, which will in turn be protecting all of our communities at large.
Thank you. Nathalia?
I think that in general, the legal landscape right now is very challenging. As Elizabeth had said, it has required a lot of creativity. So for example, something that we haven't really dove into, but OSHA has been dormant, and many of the challenges that have come up have been unsuccessful. So it's kind of getting in the weeds of some of it. But for example, where the employer's duty is to provide safety for the employee under OSHA, that's really at issue in the courts right now. Does it fall under the general duty clause? Would you need to have an emergency state mandate, or not? Do you need to have an emergency mandate from the actual agency before anything can be enforced? As well as, I don't think that's specific to immigrants, except for, as we've already discussed on the call, the disproportionate impact. But when it comes up to also legal challenges, it's also bled through in the court systems, right? So a lot of different federal court systems have been packed with justices who feel emboldened to say really remarkable things. So for example, when discussing the meatpacking industry in Wisconsin, one of the justices on their high court had the nerve to actually delineate the COVID-19 spread from the rest of the state, from the areas that had meatpacking, because it said it was for those people. And in the context of speaking about people of color that are generally in Broward County there. So like that's really remarkable to be said in the courtroom, as if that's a different region that didn't need to be afforded attention during COVID-19 because the rest of the state was doing okay. So it doesn't, the legal challenge is also about, as always, who's in the courtroom, who's making decisions, who's advocating, and who's pushing, which is why it's so important for Make the Road, Latino Justice, all these different organizations. AFL-CIO also did a challenge to OSHA as well, seeking a writ of mandamus for an ETS by OSHA. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out. There are a number of different challenges going on. People have been doing, like Elizabeth's Palmer case, have been doing nuisance charges about the way things panned out within industries. It is complicated, and so I think that's why it's so important for these conversations to happen, because I don't have any doubt that despite what I see so frequently, I don't have any doubt that people actually do care about each other's livelihoods. when it comes up to being able to go to work in a safe environment. So there's that. And then also what I said before, we discuss hazard pay. Hazard pay is, its origins. That's not something that's particularly a legal format. Hazard pay has roots in a certain doctrine under OSHA and identifying a certain level of harm that requires hazard pay, but it's very narrow, and that's for federal employees. It's not for all employees. And the majority of the population is not a federal employee. And so really thinking about it's going to take a lot more than legal challenges. It really takes people to care about what's going on to their neighbors and what's going on with themselves and their families and how it actually interlinks, which is why I still go back to the need for discussing living wages at this time. It isn't just about essential pay. The essential pay or the additional bonus or the additional funds is for navigating these treacherous waters that we're living in right now, and for providing us what we have deemed as a society to be essential. But it does not take away the fact that these workers should have had a living wage to begin with.
Can I just ask you for a clarification? Because I learned a lot on these, but there's one thing you just said that I want to make sure I understand. So the very category or the very idea of hazard pay is a legal concept that is applied to federal employees. And so every other, like grocery store workers getting hazard pay is just a choice or something that's been negotiated with the union. There's no legal mandate.
Absolutely. And so it's just at the behest of the employer. And obviously I'm partial to grocery workers. I work with grocery workers. And so, but I think that thinking of that scenario, it's these employers that are coming in, that has really shown, especially on Long Island, the relevance of having representation like a union in obtaining hazard pay, in obtaining essential workers pay, heroes pay, all these different titles. That's why you hear it called so many different names. The legal doctrine exists in OSHA, and I would argue that COVID-19 falls under a virulent biological as defined under OSHA, and that this would warrant hazard pay. However, I don't want the hazard pay to become just this only one thing, because as we're seeing, it gets taken away. I know, Marianne, you said if there's tracks on the ground telling you can only walk one way in a store, then the hazard pay should continue. Absolutely. But it doesn't take away another issue, which is if these workers are essential now, they're essential always. And it's not fair to just kind of try to categorize it in this one way. So I think that it is really important for us to be rethinking about what reprioritizing looks like beyond, all the reprioritization we've had to do in our personal lives during this time, but also looking how that extends to your community. This isn't a Washington, D.C. local community or rural community difference or issue. It's an issue across the board that we really have to think about what it means for the integrity of a worker. And now that we're asking these specifically these essential workers to go every day to work without choice, because as well, the Department of Labor has not, despite their status as essential and banging pots at 7 p.m., the Department of Labor has not actually deemed anything for these workers to provide them with something about what it means for them to be essential. There's no recognition otherwise. And so I think that that's really the conversation that people need to be having. It cannot be that they're only essential during a pandemic, and what that means about how we have deprioritized them as humans and in their labor rights and their human rights in the workspace. Is really the conversation we also need to be having. So I'm always down for hazard pay. I'm always down for workers getting more money, but I don't want it. I shy away from us just keeping it there. People need to be making living wages.
Yeah, no, great points. I mean, if we need access to food, we need it whether we have COVID or not, right? I mean, somebody's got to be there. Monica, would you like to add anything to this?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that, you know, we always say it's, you know, political action. Call your senator, you know, we're demanding hazard pay for all, heroes pay, whatever you want to call it, but some type of compensation for the work that these people are doing right now. But we can't forget about the bailouts that, you know, the companies are getting, airline companies. In my case, you know, we have airports that are being cleaned by our members. The airline companies have gotten stimulus packs, you know, bailouts for them to be able to continue operating, but the workers don't see any of that. So, you know, it's something to also call out on. If, you know, the pandemic bailouts are happening, what about the workers? What are they getting out of that? You know, and it all trickles down. It's not about just making sure the company keeps on operating, but the people that's, you know, that are in the front lines making it happen need to also get a part of that.
Hear, hear. So we've come to the point in our forum where we give where we ask the panelists to give the audience things that we can do, policies or initiatives that we can take action on so that we can become advocates for the things that we've discussed today. And so I would like to ask you that question, but before I do that, there's 7 or 8 messages in the chat, and I just want to see if we have questions that are related to issues that just came up before we move to that final question about, you know, what policies are on the horizon that you would like us to do something about, whether it's calling or writing or whatever it is. So I just want to check out some of the comments. We have one. Why don't the powers that be understand that you can put off a problem, but it doesn't go away? I can see you smiling. I love this comment. You can deal with it correctly from the start, or you can deal with it later. Often it becomes a much bigger problem. Why is it so hard for people to empathize with others? Often it's only when it affects you. I just want to make sure my scroll, the person that someone can identify with it, hashtag COVID ignorance. And I think one of our panelists, Nathalia, said that she believes that people really do support the people around them. I don't know if our panelists want to address what you've seen already in terms of solidarity from the community for immigrant workers or the lack thereof. And I will just leave that out there for anyone who wants to address the issue of empathy.
I could add, I mean, I think we've talked a lot today about the kind of the worst low road employers, which unfortunately is a large part of our work. But I will say that we have also seen just a tremendous outpouring of like mutual aid in the communities within which we work, especially around people really stepping up to help make sure that our neighbors have food, and helping each other with just kind of the basic necessities during this unprecedented time. I know Make the Road has been able to raise a lot of support to provide food through our food pantries, and I know that a lot of other organizations have started private funds for the people who have been excluded from all this government and federal relief. You know, it's not sufficient to address the gap that is there, but it has been hugely helpful and really critical to so many families during this time. So that has been heartening to see in the midst of so many people not stepping up.
Great, great. Anyone else have anything you'd like to add? Follow-up comment: American individualism, ignorance, and downright bigotry have a lot to account for, indeed. But I think that the mutual aid comment is, I think, grounds for hope. There is solidarity. Okay, Richard Kubek, we need everyone to sign on to Senator Jessica Ramos's bill, S-8277, that would create a billionaire tax to raise $5 billion to fund a New York State unemployment insurance program providing undocumented immigrants affected by COVID up to $750 a week. I just want to add, by the way, that Jessica Ramos is a Hofstra alum. We're very proud of her. I don't know if any of the panelists wanted to comment on the bill. Yes, no, maybe?
Sure. I would urge everyone, Make the Road is one of the organizations deeply involved in pushing this, along with so many other partners. So I would urge all of you to check out fundexcludedworkers.org. It has information about the bill that would provide monthly cash payments, not only to undocumented workers, but including to undocumented and other workers who are not eligible for the other relief. And the payments would be retroactive to the start of COVID. And we are really demanding flexible proof requirements in order to make sure this money is able to reach the people that it's designed to reach. So for example, day laborers working in construction who might not have pay stubs for every week, we want to use proof requirements that are used in other systems already, to like swear and attest to the kind of income you have received. So, as Monica alluded to, there's been a lot of bailouts. We know that the billionaires are making money during this pandemic, and it is just unthinkable that we are leaving hundreds of thousands of our community members out. It's just despicable.
And everyone, you can see at 2:53 p.m., Elizabeth did add the link, fundexcludedworkers.org, to sign the petition, and I encourage everyone. So I have another question. It sounds like a company slapping the hazard pay name on something to look good during this time. And yes, the hazard pay should continue, but all workers should have been paid a living wage before COVID. Where did all this PPP go? We need to track that money. Yes.
We do need to track that money, but that doesn't just go with PPP. PPP was only going to be eligible for a certain amount of time. So even if, the truth is whether we have to think about things during COVID, right? And then pre-COVID, the problems were still there. These problems were still there. People were still not being paid a living wage before COVID. The COVID just has made it that much more evident how inhumane that is, how unconscionable that is. And I don't think those are severe terms to use. It's true. People are showing up to work, they're providing services, they're doing their job, and they should be able to survive off of that income. And so really where the PPP money is going, I encourage people to do that. As I represent people during this time, I am also tracing whether the employer has received a PPP loan, where that money is going, if it's being used, if people are being fired despite the fact that they received a PPP, that the company received a PPP loan. There's an endless amount of stuff to do for tracking that money. But in general, not just PPP loan, but you asked before whether, that I said I still have faith in people. I mean, I do. I think the truth is, though, is that I really think that this is a time, especially as people sit at home and are empathizing on new levels. It's easy to kind of look inward and to just feel scared and be on your own during this very trying time. But I do think it's really important for people to more than create private funds. The private funds are important. People need that. People need food immediately. People need safety immediately. But we should be challenging ourselves to ask more of the people who represent us in government, and not just demanding it. Those are our dollars. That's our money. Those are our taxes. All of those, and also it's our moral compass. That's our conscience that's out there. Those are all relevant to the conversation. And so I think that, you know, I have a slew of things that I think people should be ringing their bells on, and like different bills and such, or causes or campaigns, of course. But overall, I think that people should take some of the fear that they have about what's going on in COVID-19 and activate. And it happens on a spectrum, right? It's contacting your local government, demanding that certain things happen, living wages, that we continue to get paid childcare during this time, you know, that rent still is waived during this time. If mortgages are waived, rent can be waived. Like, you know, those are all those sorts of things, you know, asking for it, and kind of looking in of not doing self-oppression of like, well, I guess I could pull in two and two together. It's an extreme amount of stress that isn't needing. It isn't great for the body during a time of public health crisis either, in our own individual capacities. And so it's more than just providing shelter or providing food for one day. It's really take the time to be a community member and to reach out to your community and thinking about what your values are and pushing on what you can do. You know, dream as much as you can about what it would be like to have people feel safe and secure in their livelihood. And there's no reason that time can't be now. I really think that. I really don't think there's any reason why that time can't be now. It takes a lot of strength, but I think that everyone has that strength. And I hope that everybody has that level of empathy and understanding for one another. So yeah, but there are a ton of different things that we should be challenging that are concrete in there. So I just like to be in the abstract. It lets me talk for longer.
Here. Monica, there's a request for your contact information. If you want to put that in the
Yes,
chat.
I reached out to
Okay.
CC.
Terrific. Great.
And I'm sorry, I have to go. I have a call at 3.
Okay.
I had a call at 3. And yes, thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
And I also added, we could also call Mitch McConnell and, you know, ask, why is he blocking, you know, this bill? And tell them to stop blocking it. You know, we need PPE protection. We need hazard pay. Everyone that's been on the front lines, not just the big corporations. Thank you all.
Thank you. Are there any other specific policies or initiatives that our audience, our participants can advocate for? I know, Nathalia, you went big, but if there are particular things in addition to Jessica Ramos's the bill that she's sponsoring.
I think contacting your federal representatives in different capacities currently, you know, they are trying to push through that employers would not be held liable for, you know, their failure to protect their workers at this time. And that liability, closing that off, there are a number of other suits that go out there, like, you know, wrongful death. We hear things all the time of people who knew that their employees had COVID and didn't notify them, and people were getting sick in the workplace and no one was saying anything, and it just continued to spread. We're looking at requirements under OSHA, so you know, pushing for OSHA to actually use its power. And then I would also say pushing that employers should be held liable for negligence at this time in relation to COVID-19. I would say pushing for another thing that's absolutely important is pushing for data collection. That's relevant to our understanding of how this is happening, what's going on in the workplaces, and then, you know, I think all the other protections. I guess those are initiatives that are happening. I don't have like the bills exactly, but those are different campaigns. A.L.L.O.W is a really great organization that's pushing forward the campaign, I believe, for employer liability for pandemic related harms in the workplace. And I think the other thing is that if there's something that you see that's happening in your neighborhood, there's no reason why you can't start drafting and figuring out what's best. And it can be on a local level as well, you know, within your county. It doesn't have to be as large. Like push your county to say, you know what, if you're an employer here in our county and you are housing essential workers, you must do a raise, or you must pay hazard pay. Why can't that exist? You know, so just you can encourage your own by like kind of getting creative and thinking about what's the need.
Elizabeth?
I will continue to plug the fund excluded workers. I think we Make the Road have identified that as really our priority, and I think Nathalia and Monica's suggestions were great, but this is something very concrete. It has a chance to pass now. So the more support we can show across the state, I think particularly for folks on the call who are on Long Island, it would just be really helpful to show the broad support across the state for this.
I have a comment just with regard to employer liability from Alexandra. It would be a complete disaster. I can't believe this is actually a conversation. Actually, I can believe it. The only way employers act to protect workers is when there exists I can't read the rest. My chat is weirding out. There exists the threat of liability. So there's an issue, I think, that we can certainly coalesce around. We also have a suggestion: encourage participation in the census of all immigrants. The deadline is September 30th. That's another, I think, really good idea. We lose resources when we lose population, and even if we don't lose population, but we don't show it on the census. So here for that. If you have, Elizabeth and Nathalia, or anyone who's on this call, if you have ideas or things that you know, specifics for bills or initiatives that you think people would be interested in supporting, or that you would like to bring to our attention, if you send them to me, I can make them available. Greg, we've posted resources on our Hofstra Labor Studies webpage. We can send out information to the people on this who've registered for this event. So anything that you would like us to know about and to spread to other people who are on this call, and even those who couldn't make it, we will happily do that.
I'm happy to send anything along, but just to accentuate that any suggestion that like I've put out there for today, or anything that I've like kind of encouraged, I think I forget to go without saying that it should be without a limit on anybody's immigration status. That is in direct contradiction to public health models, to exclude people from benefits during this time. And that, you know, I think Elizabeth's point was so important, and something that doesn't get said enough is about the standards of what that means. Because if you're going to say it's without regard for immigration status, but then require 10 different forms of documentation that is extremely difficult to obtain, then you also are precluding people from receiving necessities. So
Great point. Yeah, thank you for adding that. Any other questions from our audience? Terrific. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Oh, okay, so Nathalia, we have a request for your last name and agency. I can let you speak for yourself if you want to tell people about what there you go, okay. So it's in the chat. And I'm sure that our panelists would be happy to work with anybody here. If you want me to connect you, you can contact me or just put a request in the chat. Yeah, the chat was a little loopy today. Everything was loopy, but thank you for hanging in there, everyone. I really appreciate our panelists. I appreciate the organizers. This is the last, as I said, of our 3 forums, and it's been really great to meet everyone. It's been terrific to have Hofstra Labor Studies and the Center for Labor and Democracy really kind of dig into the community at this really, really stressful but important moment. And we are hoping to continue these conversations in the fall. We're looking at possibly visiting the school openings, maybe healthcare, environmental issues as we move forward into the fall. Who knows what it holds for us, but we hope that you will be with us for these future conversations. Thank you, everyone, for the work that you do, and particularly to our speakers today. You were great.
Thanks so much for having us. And yes, we'd be happy to connect with anyone here, and appreciate everyone's time today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And special thank you to Jobs with Justice for the invitation as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Jobs with Justice does terrific work, and Alexandra with A.L.L.O.W. They've been great community partners, so we're really fortunate to have them. That's how we're going to do this, right? Together. All right, everyone, stay safe in the storm. I will now go out and see my downed tree and all the other damage around, and I hope everyone stays well today and always.